So my name is Mike Pribyl. I'm with DDTF LLC. And then this is Brent Petersen with Brown County. He does some coordination. What's your title again, Brent?
The project manager for the Lower Fox River Basin.
Okay. So if we back up 5, 6, 7 years ago, our small business got started with conservation on the no-till cover crop arena. We went through that process with a couple different customers, one in particular. And then throughout the last 5, 6 years, we realized that there were some challenges that we weren't addressing with that no-till cover crop system. So we really migrated into the strip-till system, trying to address those fertility issues, trying to address that sidewall compaction, trying to address any of these issues that we have in a little bit more detailed approach, a little bit more surgical approach with the strip-till system versus just the no-till cover crop system. And then working with Brent at Brown County, we worked through realizing that we had these challenges, and we said, okay, how do we address these? And Brent and I did a lot of research. Brent in particular did a lot of research on how do we bring this together, collected a lot of data with pressure tests and soil fertility, in the zone versus out of the zone. So Brent can kind of fill in a little bit more on that, how we transitioned into the strip-till.
Yeah, and I think some of it probably stemmed back to some issues that we had with some growers here initially here, starting through the no-till system. No-till, it can work fantastically, but we ran into some things here that we thought needed to be addressed. Part of it was the fertility aspect of it. And the compaction issues that we talked about. We had a lot of soils that were beyond the 300 psi threshold. So, and the strip-till system was something that really kind of addressed a lot of those issues here as we move forward.
Yeah, I think as we were taking samples that initial year when we were doing mainly no-till and cover crop, when Brent was doing some pressure tests, we were seeing a lot of 300 pluses. And then that following spring, we went and did some strip tilling, and we were taking samples in the zone and out of the zone, and we were seeing significant reductions from one versus the other, and we really like to see that. This way we can allow those roots to expand and get that fertility where we needed it.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the early indicators that you saw with strip-till that kind of gave you a good momentum, that hey, this is going to be kind of that good system that maybe we're looking for here in the area with growers? And then in particular, how you guys saw the opportunity with developing kind of that custom opportunity around that. Yeah,
so we've talked about, and we've been really involved in the custom work for a number of years, and kind of how do we segue that strip-till into there. So the early indicators that we just saw that initial plant vigor out of the ground. I mean, we had everything coming up very, very similar time frame. I mean, I know ideal conditions, we want to see everything come up within 12 hours of one another. We might not be seeing that, but we are seeing excellent emergence. Our final stands are significantly better. So that's number one early indication, is how do we get that plant off to a good start? Get them all up at the same time, or all up very similar. We don't want weeds growing out there. So that was one of the first indications. And then also ultimately, when we watch things throughout the growing season, we're having really healthy plants. When we're getting into corn silage harvest around here with all the dairy we have, we're seeing ears that are fully developed, and the kernels are drying down. Ears are hanging, but our plants are nice and green yet. The plant material is nice and green. So we're making excellent quality feed, excellent quality yields. And so we were just seeing those early indications that we're addressing those bottlenecks, we're addressing that limiting factor throughout the year by taking the strip-till approach versus the, maybe some other approaches that are out there, the conventional till or the no-till approach.
Hey, Brent, you talked earlier about just the kind of the insect populations that kind of there had been a lack of, and then kind of seeing more of those, as you got into some more of those conservation practices.
Yeah, originally a lot of this stuff stemmed from no-till and the cover crops ends of things, and as time moves on, and I've got a lot of agronomy experience here, being out in the field, but we don't have those insects in the forms and the beneficials that we necessarily need here in these conventional systems. So with the strip-till with the strip tillage, we leave a lot of that ground intact, and there's a lot of insects in that ground that if you just leave it alone, they're probably going to be there. So,
Yeah. So earlier we discussed the number of beneficial bugs, the number of insects, just the populations out there, the biology. How do we get that cooking? How do we let Mother Nature work for us? So when in the conventional till systems, I think Brent saw, when we were working with UW Green Bay on some of these counts, we're seeing 4, 5, 6, 7 species out in a field of conventionally tilled ground. On these strip till conservation-minded acres, with the cover crops and leaving that ground intact, leaving that stuff undisturbed or as little disturbed as we can, we're seeing 30, 40. We're seeing the beneficial bugs come back. So over time we've lost those beneficials and we've lost the bad ones, but we want the beneficials to come back and really help us out with these situations.
Absolutely. Good. I'm glad you brought that up. That's kind of what I was looking to get at. All right. Just gonna grab my notebook here. So, and this will probably be a separate video, but just kind of talking a little bit about kind of the custom opportunity, and maybe I can have you just talk a little bit about the scope of what you guys do, in terms of acreage and the different field operations you're providing, and then again, kind of looking at how you've seen those opportunities kind of present themselves, and what are you hearing from, farmers on kind of results they're seeing. You had a very good example you shared earlier. If maybe you want to go into a little bit of that, certainly, Brian, if there's anything you want to add to, supplement what Mike says. So
yeah, sure. So on from our custom business standpoint, we're currently doing, a fairly decent amount of acres. We're running about 2,000 acres that we're planting every year, and then we do a very large amount of side dressing. In our opinion, it's a big undertaking. We do between 6,000 and 7,000 acres of custom side dressing every year with liquid fertilizer. And then we do a fair amount of fall work as well with cover crop planting, winter wheat planting. So some of the opportunities that we see on the custom side is leveling out that workload. So currently we have super busy springs and super busy falls. But that's really kind of, we got really busy springs in May and June for planting, but we have some availability of time in April where not a whole lot else is going on, kind of before that pre-plant rush. So how do we shift some of that workload that would normally be in May or June into April? Same thing happens in fall. How do we shift maybe some of that into a later fall? Right now our fall is really consumed with September, October seeding time. But how do we shift some of that workload maybe into November, December, get more work out of the equipment that we have, be more effective with our time? That's really where we see these opportunities stemming from. And as far as results, we've been seeing good results. Hopefully we're going to be producing more, using less inputs and getting a greater return on investment. Or if we keep the inputs the same, hopefully we can improve those yields and get better quality. I mean, ultimately what drives things around in Northeast Wisconsin with all the dairy that we have here is the quality of the forages that we produce. And that's really what we want to see is, how do we produce corn silage that's got high starch content, healthy plants to give us good digestibility, so that we can get the best milk production and have as healthy of animals on the outside, on the other side as we can have. We've been seeing that, and we want to see more of that moving forward.
You had an example of a customer you worked with last year, where you were able to, kind of measure some of the kind of the ROI or just the benefits there. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
So in one particular case this past year, we did some strip tilling in spring, heavier P and K application, phosphorus and salt, potassium application, less nitrogen. So typically a system that we do is either typical going back a couple of years, we'd be doing conventional tillage. We'd come back, plant, heavy side dress later on with our nitrogen component, and then we'd harvest later on. On this particular case, we strip tilled P and K. We came through and we planted with a normal planting program, and for whatever reason, we were unable to get out to that field to get it side dressed. We had ran into issues, whether it was Mother Nature with moisture, or maybe it was just timing, all that kind of stuff. Well, this particular grower and a couple of our growers have been doing more and more harvest lab stuff with John Deere, doing some yield mapping. So what we looked at on that one compared it to other like fields, and we saw similar yields. I'd say we were still within that 10 to 15% of the top yields. We saw good starch levels. I mean, maybe a little bit less than what some of the other stuff that had gotten side dressed was, but still within a relevant range that was, what to me was acceptable. And so we're looking at this saying, that's telling us that we're not addressing the right bottlenecks all the time. We're throwing a lot of money at nitrogen, but maybe we need to be addressing a different bottleneck. In this case, I think the bottleneck was definitely on the potassium side, and by putting that up front, we were able to have a healthier plant. It was able to more efficiently use those nutrients that we had out there. Maybe we got some mineralization from the organic matter in the soil. It's very possible to supplement that nitrogen. But from a yield standpoint, based on the harvest data, the quality was there, and the yield was very similar, and the starch was very similar. So I think we addressed a lot of the limiting factors. Now, if we would have addressed the nitrogen, we definitely would have had even a better result. But yeah, it was just reiterating to the fact that we can make this work and make it really effective.
Brent, anything to add in terms of what you're seeing just from a bigger picture standpoint on some of the soil health, or just the better management of inputs?
Yeah, I just feel like we're giving the field a little opportunity to kind of rest and heal in some of these locations here. They do take quite a bit of a beating, especially not this past fall, but the previous 2 falls there. They took a heck of a beating there. So, and that really leads to future years as time goes on. Those crops just don't respond quite as well if they've been beaten up here. So, with the StripTill, from what I've seen of it, we've given it that opportunity to rest and heal.
So one of the things moving forward that Brent and we've discussed at length is, how do we measure that soil health benefit, right? Because we can look at NP and K, typical soil test results, all that we want, but that doesn't necessarily encompass that soil health concept. Organic matter levels a good indicator, but so we've talked about looking at Haney soil tests on some of this ground that we've been leaving in a strip-till or no-till system with the cover crops and measuring that biological activity. And I think that's really going to be our baseline moving forward. We know that after we leave this ground sit or sit in a minimal till system, that the next time you work it up, it works beautifully, right? But we don't want to be doing that. So how can we measure that and put actual numbers to it to say that, hey, this is where we started, this is where we're going, and this is where we're at right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting to follow when you dig some of the soil up here in the 20-inch gap there, and you follow the roots from some of these plants, the cover crops and even the corn, and you'll follow that corn root running right down the earthworm channel. And we wouldn't get that if we're tearing that field up, so it's interesting to see that. So